Welcome to My Psychedelic Roots, a podcast of conversations with people from a broad swath of lived experience to explore their psychedelic beginnings or roots, what led them to start using psychedelics, what those early experiences were like, and how those roots have impacted their life's unfolding. My name is Amy Bartlett, and it is my hope that these stories, generously shared by my guests, offer perspective and insight into the lived reality of psychedelic experiencing. So whoever, wherever, or whenever you are, welcome. I'm glad you're here. In this episode, I was pleased to be in conversation with the lovely Bonney Elliott, a dual licensed, registered psychotherapist and nurse practitioner based in Ottawa, Canada. Bonney works in private practice and group retreat settings and has a decades-long career supporting people grieving loss, cancer, and chronic illness, people recovering from trauma, those navigating significant life transitions. And she has a breadth of experience both as a therapist and a nurse, supporting folks in navigating the liminal spaces between life and death, along with everything in between. As we will hear in this episode, Bonney is also a person learning to caretake herself and find her own joy. After a childhood peppered with references to psychedelics in the 70s and 80s, and a difficult first encounter with mushrooms in her early 20s, Bonney's interest in psychedelics lay dormant, but was eventually reignited by a CBC radio piece a few years ago on the end-of-life distress, a field she's familiar with, and its intersection with psilocybin mushrooms. From there, and supported by her experiences with ecotherapy, yoga, and meditation, her journey with psychedelics restarted. And in our conversation, Bonney shares some of the profound shifts, personal growth, and healing that she has witnessed, not just for her clients, but for herself as well. And so, let's hear more about Bonney's psychedelic roots. Welcome, Bonney.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Lovely to have you. And as we begin our conversation today, what do you think it's important that people know about you and your background and your life today before we move into talking about what came before?
Yeah. So my interest in psychedelics was sparked by a CBC radio piece that I heard a few years ago. It's all been a series of synchronous events, but I was doing a training and I went for a walk and I listened. I think it was Tapestry, and they were talking about psilocybin for end of life distress. And I had worked quite a bit with people with cancer and like kids and adults and families, with chronic illness and stuff. And the thing that always felt like a stuck point was that existential angst and fear that people butted up against. I felt like, we're prolonging people's lives, but we're not improving quality of life, or are we, and I was also doing a bit of spiritual exploration of my own on living your life as though you were dying, like drill down to what was important. So it's kind of those two things kind of merged. So I guess I listened to that podcast and of course it was in the ether, but it just gave me a bit of hope and curiosity. And it just sent me down this path. And it really was synchronous because like I would, someone reached out wanting to, help people out. Like it was just, it just kind of went from there. I ended up just doing some training. I connected with other professionals. And then of course, as part of the training, we did our own experience and that was profound. And I've always, initially it was around end of life, but I work with a lot of folks who've had developmental trauma, intergenerational trauma, and climate anxiety,
Yes.
and in all of those arenas, I often felt like, talk is not enough. And spirituality is not always enough either, because we can bypass the things that are hard. So I'm just really grateful. And I started doing some retreat work and incorporating psychedelic work into my practice. I work primarily as a psychotherapist now. and then, watching those shifts that happened for the clients, but also for myself. Like I've done a lot of healing and growth. It hasn't always been easy. It's kicked my butt a few times, but I'm really grateful for that. And
Mm,
so I guess, yeah, that's what I'd like people to know.
yeah, that's beautiful.
Mm,
And I love how there's a mix of curiosity that is informed not just by your own life experience, but about the life experience of the clients that you're
mm,
supporting and sort of like looking at the broader world.
mm,
It feels like you have quite an expansive curiosity, and
mm,
psychedelics hit an expansive range of human experience, both your own and others,
yeah,
that's really
yeah,
beautiful in terms of feeding into your eventual move into the space and how you
mhm,
engage in the
mhm.
space. I love that.
Yeah, I think curiosity has taken me to some interesting places in my life and taken me out of some dark places in my life. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think
And
it's
so were you a curious kid?
I was thinking about, my life sort of leading up to that. And so I was born 1966. The day I was born, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was the number one song. Just fun fact.
That's a great fact.
And I'm the youngest in my family. I had much older siblings. So my older sisters were kind of hippies, and they looked babysat me a lot. So I just what I remember of the 60s as being this sort of free-spirited little kid. I spent a lot of time outside. I had a very rich inner life of imagination, and then Cat Stevens and the Beatles playing in the background. So that was the 60s. But then in the 70s, I would say that life got darker in general, but also for our family. Like there were social forces, but then there was also, and I think I had to put that sort of little hippie chick away for a while to survive and to cope with school and life.
Hmm. Do you
Uh,
mind if I ask, Bonnie, did your family talk about psychedelics or LSD at that time
not,
in the 60s? And
I would have been too young to
I
really
guess.
understand it in a tangible way.
Mm,
And that's what I was going to talk about the 70s because
yes.
I remember my brother and boys at parties kind of in the corner, taking whatever drugs and acting weird. And it was a little scary, and my parents had a lot of their own trauma. They drank heavily. So I think I came to associate that with more chaos and,
Yeah.
not feeling safe, and so I kind of took the opposite route. I didn't smoke. I barely drank. I was like the goody, focused on, my teachers liking me at school and excelling in that way. So I didn't hang out with the cool kids,
Yeah.
in high school. And I just was also never like a thrill seeker. And I don't know if that was as curious as I am. I'm not an adrenaline junkie. Like, so,
Hmm.
that could have been because life was chaotic, but I think it might have been my temperament too. So,
Hmm.
mm.
Did you have a spiritual tone or tenor in your family or for yourself privately when you were a child and growing up in that kind of environment?
Yeah, my mom was Catholic, but by the time I came around, it wasn't enforced. She just had a very quiet kind of a faith, and so I'm grateful for that actually.
Hmm.
And then my dad was, for him, church was more about community and stuff like so. I didn't have religion kind of forced on me, but I think I was just a really spiritual kid. Like, yeah, I spent a lot of time outside,
Mm.
sometimes to get away from the chaos. But I also discovered, I remember I used to go out and look at the stars and, we had woods around, we lived in a very remote place. And so, and I had a lot of imaginary friends. I think I was just that kind of kid, that was perceptive that way. So,
Hmm.
and my parents didn't really shut it down. Like we had lots of books around, we had lots of things to explore and stuff. So, mm,
Yeah.
mm.
What was your relationship? You mentioned the stars and sort of living in a remote environment. What was your relationship to nature? Was that part? It sounds like that was part of your spirituality or your
Yeah, yeah. I think
relationship to the
it
world.
was just a place where I felt held. Like
Mm.
I remember lying out on the snow and like, when you're you sort of look at the sky and it feels like you're going to fall in, like,
Yes.
yeah, I just always felt that way.
I love how you
And I
put
didn't have
that.
words for it or, and I think if I had words for it, I might have been teased by my brother and stuff, but it was kind of always interested. I loved brownies because brownies was magical, like,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Was there a particular moment? So you grew up in the late 60s and into the 70s, becoming a teenager,
Mhm.
navigating social environments. Was there a moment, a conversation, an experience that made you start thinking about psychedelics in a different way than you experienced them as a child? Less chaotic and more curiosity? Or were they part of your social circle
Mhm.
in any way?
So, unlike my hippie sisters, I came of age in the 80s and it was the kind of the war on
Yes.
drugs and
Mhm.
that nefarious research that was happening. So it wasn't really like it was there, but it wasn't calling to me other than the music and art, like that part of it was I was always intrigued by, I think. But my first exposure to psychedelics, it wasn't to carefree exploration or like a deep dive into my psyche. It
Mm.
was like a naive lapse of judgment. Like I was at a concert with, friends of my boyfriend at the time. He wasn't there. They were brewing mushroom tea. And I think it wasn't like they forced me to do it. Like it was just, I think I was this buttoned up little student nurse and maybe part of me wanted to, not be that for a while, but I really had no
Mhm.
idea what the effect of them was going to be or how much
Yeah.
it took or that it was really not a good idea to take mushrooms and then go to a concert and, be with strangers. And so I was a mess.
Yeah. So how old were you at that time?
I was probably about 19 or 20.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's younger. And so when did you realize that you had taken this mushroom tea and you were moving into a altered state of consciousness? Did it hit you fast or did
I
you?
think I don't know, I don't remember it all because
Hmm.
I remember taking them, and then I remember sort of flashes of the evening, and because there was other drugs and alcohol involved and all
Yes.
that, so it was just a chaotic I remember more throwing up afterwards, and then the people I was with trying to sort of take care of me, but I was a liability, like, so they finally dropped me off and I was alone, like, and I just remember feeling like so wretched and as for days afterwards and so ashamed and embarrassed and like it was the opposite of the right setting, like
Yeah.
I was fairly new in town, so I wasn't with people that I trusted. I wasn't, and I had nobody to talk to about it. It wasn't something that most of my friends did, or it was kind of a really one-off for me in my life at that time. So
Sounds like it
um,
had a lot of shame attached or
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Just being that sort of messy in public and not remembering, and yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
But I don't regret it now because I think even though it had the effect of just like putting everything back in the box and closing the box, I don't think that box totally shut. Like I think there was,
I mean, obviously not.
yeah, yeah.
What was the main lesson do you think that you learned from that experience that kept you connected to that ongoing curiosity that
Mhm.
eventually led you into that space? Or maybe there wasn't something, I don't know.
I mean, I think the lesson that I learned at a conscious level was like, don't let it out of the box. Be all the things, stay color within the lines, be that person that people expect you to be. But I think it also, I do remember having a few conversations with people afterwards, and I do remember some truths that came through about like, maybe I didn't want that path I was going on in life, that I had some ambivalence about it. I didn't make any big changes to that until later, but I could be messy and still land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Life still goes on.
Yeah.
Everything's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then I became a nurse and really sort of didn't really see psychedelics in and of themselves as more as, sort of other drugs and other mental health issues and addictions. So, really got like a skewed view of them that way too.
How did your nursing education, how did they talk about psychedelics? Did you ever encounter them in your practice, and were they
Mm.
welcomed? I presume not.
I remember a baby coming into Emerge who had taken some of its parents' LSD, and it was like a huge thing, and it was, a child welfare kind of thing.
Mm.
I remember working with someone who had flashbacks. I mean, their flashbacks were probably more related to trauma and all that stuff, but it was kind of all lumped in together, and I did street health. Like I worked with people who were, just not doing well in general. So I was really pretty ignorant
Hmm.
about those things. But I do remember having some conversations with people who had, had a different, like kind of like my older sisters in the 60s, where they'd had sort of a gentler, more kind of like me looking at the stars when I was a kid, that kind of exposure to psychedelics, but they were more the exception, I would say, because people didn't really talk about it that much. It was kind of really shut down in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so was that Tapestry podcast kind of the switch for you, or did it come before then?
That's a good question because I think what it was is that I was exposed. I mean, I've had some very profound experiences through yoga and meditation and birth and, with dying people. And I worked, in a First Nations reserve where plant medicines are really treated in a much more sacred way. And so I think it was just gradually seeing things from a different lens and having experiences, that were outside the box of logic or, through meditation, through breath work and stuff. So it felt like it wasn't really a stretch, I think.
Mm.
It was just like another pebble along the path, I think.
Yes.
But I think what got me was the distress that people were feeling at end of life and that feeling of like just, I don't want to say helplessness, but oh, and I know I actually I had worked with, it's funny you say that. I had worked with a trans woman who was dying, who, we never specifically talked about psychedelics, but they did a lot of meditation and I'm pretty sure that was part of their way of, and they were just so at peace with everything. So yeah, I
Mm.
think just like there was just a cascade of things that made that sort of like, yeah, that could be a thing.
Yeah. It sounds like your work in end of life opened up
Mm-hmm.
new ways of seeing the possibilities. The end of life space is so beautiful because it is a place where people are at their most vulnerable, but also
Hmm.
there's such a contrast and everybody has such a different experience.
Yeah.
It's really interesting that you got to observe how different people move in that space, and that helped
Mm-hmm.
you understand or be curious about how people
Yeah.
arrive differently, or that's
Yeah.
what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think unlike meditation and yoga, where you can always kind of spiritually bypass and birth and death, there is no, it's down and dirty and they're very liminal spaces even without psychedelic, like so I think having been exposed to that
Mhm.
maybe opened my mind to other possibilities.
Yes.
Mm.
You've mentioned birth a couple times. I'm
Mm.
wondering, we've talked a little bit about how you accompanying others in their death experience is tied to your eventual opening into the curiosity of psychedelics for therapeutic purposes. I'm curious about the other side of the coin and the birth side of things, whether
Yeah.
birthing your own children or witnessing and supporting others, how
Mhm.
that might have accompanied or complemented.
Mhm. I think it did. I mean, I have three kids, and I witnessed births as a student nurse, but I had a midwife, and I had like really amazing support through birth, and it really was a liminal place. Like I even just becoming a mother, and opened up some possibilities of, I had unmedicated births. And when I look back, I think like, hey, if I could do that, like, and then experiences in breath work, and then later with psychedelics really kind of, there was a lot of parallels, and, and even exploring, my own birth. I was breech, and, my mom had a terrible experience, and, like, and how that may have shaped some of my ways of being in the world and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it really, I also do somatic work, and I think that certainly changed my practice, but like, it would have been a lot harder to navigate the psychedelic space if I hadn't been in, at least in some touch with my body that way, like, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And again, birth and death are the most embodied experiences that we can have in a way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just being with people in those spaces, and there's like a just an authenticity, and yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so you had this experience when you were 19 or 20 of your technically your first psychedelic
Technically.
experience that
Yeah.
lots of lessons, but
Mm.
felt more like a distancing from psychedelics perhaps than a coming towards. And
Absolutely.
so these moments and experiences throughout your life moving back towards,
Mhm.
what was that process of moving to your second
Yeah.
first
Yeah.
experience, as it were?
Yeah. It was a bit, I don't want to say bipolar, but like on the one hand, I think I was very curious, and I did, my first experience, as was with MDMA. So there was this curiosity, but there was also fear, like, like what's down there, what's it gonna be like? Am I gonna be able to navigate it? But obviously there was some, magnet or anchor that was driving me there, because I didn't have to do it. I was actually doing psilocybin training, and one of the wise trainers, like, I have such gratitude to her. She suggested doing MDMA first, and since then I've trained in both. But yeah, it was a beautiful place to start, and it was the set and the setting, and yeah, I think I had the capacity to navigate
Mm.
that. I wasn't prepared for how, like, I'd experienced fear, and I mean, I remember having panic attacks after my daughter was born, but I'd never experienced it. It was like body terror is how I would describe it. Like, it was like, and, reaching out for support with that. But then that moving into the experience of joy and power and like love that I probably hadn't felt since I was a child, and I'm a very visual person, even though MDMA is not a traditional, hallucinogenic. I had a very rich inner experience, and the music was such a part of it for me. Music has really, I would say, psychedelics has really changed my appreciation of music. And it's so funny because it goes back to when I was a kid. And then that first MDMA experience, I had this octopus who appeared and brought me down into the depths. And I mean, I feel, I could cry thinking about it, because it was like a friend, it was like a friend to show me that, probably 90%, 95% of what's down there is beautiful and unexplored. And, what a way to feel that. And I remember having this experience of being in the womb of the earth, like being held and mothered, and yeah. And I had given myself the gift of time afterwards to really process it. And I had people in my life I could talk to about it. I had a therapist I could talk to about it, and for the most part, people were supportive. And, so I feel it was like the opposite experience of the first,
Yeah.
anyways.
You've described some of the set and setting differences. I'm curious, yeah, like what were some of the main differences between the first
Yeah. First,
lowercase f and the first uppercase F,
yeah.
as it were?
Yeah. Well, it was conscious. yeah, I knew a little bit what to expect, and was daytime. I wasn't in a environment where that were so many variables that made it unsafe. And I felt held by, I felt like the container of being witnessed. It was like having a midwife, like, and I've been that for other people. And, other than giving birth and a few times in surgery, it was probably the first time I'd ever really leaned into, letting somebody else hold the reins.
Mm,
I still felt like myself, but like, yeah, so that was really, that in itself was healing.
a deep surrender.
Mm,
Yes. And
mhm.
allowing ourselves to be cared for. It's one of the
Yeah,
most difficult things to do, especially in my experience when we've learned to navigate and just exist in the world in chaos.
yeah.
We're so prepared.
Mhm, mhm.
And yeah, to let the preparation go and just
Yeah,
be.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think the difference between that experience and the first one was that I didn't even know at 19 that I deserved to be cared for.
Yes.
I felt like I deserved to be discarded because I did something stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry you had that
Mhm,
experience.
mhm.
What were the main lessons from that first therapeutic experience that have informed how you
Mhm.
work or how you support others or, how you continue to support yourself and nourish yourself or
Yeah,
caretake yourself?
yeah. I think the biggest lesson for me was that in order to survive, I wasn't allowing myself to thrive. Like I had the fear, the things I'd pushed down, were nothing compared to like the mutedness of the stuff I held in my body and myself, didn't allow like for light, and yeah. I think, it's one thing to talk about feeling love. I think having the experience of it, maybe not as much in that one, but in subsequent ones, I think that one was more about joy. I can still take a deep breath and feel that. Like I still have access to the emotional content of the experience, and that changes so many things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that you still have access to those openings and those truths.
Mm.
I expect that's a testament to the integration you've done.
I hope so. I mean, I've also learned a lot. I mean, I've sat with tons of people and learned from them too. But yeah, I think so. I think one thing I've learned recently too is like, as a nurse and as a kid in a chaotic family, I had an empathy channel that was open, but it eclipsed my own emotions. Like,
Yes. Yeah. So the way you've described your childhood
mm,
and your first psychedelic experience and then a big pullback, but all these little breadcrumbs and all these little experiences that kept you connected to your curiosity about what else the human
mhm.
experience can look like. I'm curious, do you feel like psychedelics called to you in some way?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was too. It's been too. There's been too many coincidence and synchronous events, like like of just being in a place at a time. And I mean, I guess I could have said no, but it's felt that there's a bigger consciousness going on in the world, and especially with psilocybin. I mean, it it has an intelligence. Yeah.
Yeah. What role do psychedelics play in your life and in your practice today?
They are. It's hard to say because psychedelics have changed probably the way I work, the way I'm attuned to my clients, and so even if I'm not working in that arena, I think it's there. Authenticity comes to mind as a word, just like less able to not be who I am, but also maybe less patience with inauthenticity in the world. I have to be mindful of that sometimes. also like non-binary, like that things coexist,
Yeah.
joy and terror and pain and pleasure, that a lot of times people come for help because they just don't want to feel pain anymore. They just, but the very things that they're doing are feeding the pain, like, so yeah, just a desire to take a deeper dive with people and also a real trust. Like I always trusted that people had their own kind of inner healer, but I trust it way more. Like a lot of times it's just for me to get out of the way and be present and quiet. Mm,
Yes.
mm,
That's beautiful.
mm,
How I'm trying to think, Bonnie, about how to phrase this question.
mm,
I mean, part of me wants to sort of phrase it in a way of like, what does a psychedelic life look like for you? Or
mm,
do you want to be living a psychedelic life? Or is this a human life? I don't know, maybe that's not the right framing, but
mm,
I'm what I'm hearing from our conversation is that there has been a calling for
mm,
you and you're embodying and answering that calling
mm,
even before your more recent experiences, that liminal space between life and death, whether
mm,
it's on the birth side or the death side, but you've been operating in those spaces for a long time professionally and supporting others in their contemplation of. I guess I'm curious, psychedelics have always been there for you in some way.
mm,
And in honoring that calling, I'm curious about what role you feel like they will continue to play in your life, or do you
mm.
feel guided by them, or are you guided by yourself?
I don't know if this answers it, but I think on the one hand, I really trust my intuition and I really trust the path that's kind of opening for me. By the same token, I know how easy it is to lie to myself and to shut down my own emotions and I find that psychedelics are very truth telling and very it's like awareness and compassion, like and I think that's something that I want to continue to lean into because it's just easy to get caught up in the material world and the mundane and yeah. And I do think it's an ongoing relationship. Like, there are times where, just listening to music or breath work, has become almost just as powerful a way in, if not, you know, sometimes more so. So I don't, it's not just about the medicine for me. It's like a whole relationship.
Mhm.
Um, One of the biggest gifts for me, I think, has been connectedness to the natural world for sure, like rediscovering that, but the intergenerational stuff. Like I think the bigger picture about my parents' lives and the forces that shaped them and like I feel no anger. As there's lots of other layers to excavate for sure, but when it comes to that piece, I'm really grateful for that. Like I think it has given me peace. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's always another layer. Yeah.
There always is.
Mhm.
As a
Mhm.
final question, do you have any advice for folks who are contemplating going down this path or feel a curiosity or a longing or
Mhm.
a pull?
Mhm. I mean, I do see a lot of people taking psychedelics because they want to fix their brain or, or they watched Michael Pollan and they want to, and nothing again, I think that there's some beautiful work out there, but I do think it's not for the faint of heart and it's not, it's not something to do because because someone else thinks that it's a good thing for you or that it's gonna change your life, like I think yeah, with curiosity and self-compassion and not alone, like yeah.
Yes.
And I worry a lot about the medical model and that sort of idea of, here, take this magic pill, I mean, and maybe I'm biased because I am a psychedelic assisted therapist, but I really do think it needs to be in the context of a container that doesn't have to be therapy for everyone, but like really having a place to integrate and unpack and make sense of those experiences. Because otherwise, it's just a big experience, and you don't bring it back into your life.
Mm. Yes. Yeah. Well, I think that's good advice.
Mm.
Well, thank you so much, Bonney, for the conversation. Is there
Thank
any
you.
final words or anything we didn't touch on that you'd like to bring in?
Just a thank you to you. I mean, I'm very grateful for the spaces that you've held for me and the spaces that you have held for others. And
Oh, it's very
mm,
kind.
mm,
Thank you for sharing your story, for the warmth and the joy and the thoughtfulness with which you move through these spaces and supporting others and supporting yourself. It really is
mm,
inspiring. And I'm always so grateful to have time to spend in your gentle and thoughtful
mm,
energy. So thank you so
mm,
much for being here today and for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Thank
That
you.
means a lot. Mm.
Mm.